This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Place to Be Nation Comics proudly presents DC Post-Crisis Management, a monthly miniseries exploring DC Comics crisis events from 1986 through today. Universes will die, continuities will reboot, minds will be bent, and eyes will cross. The end is only the beginning, is the end, or some such nonsense.
What I couldn't do with plenty of money and you, in spite of the worry that money brings just a
the bright lights of Las Vegas, Nevada. I've finally made it out here to the west, and I gotta tell you guys, I'm pretty stressed out over some of the stuff that I've read since Identity Crisis. Man, things they just keep getting worse in the DC universe. I don't understand where all this darkness is coming from, what the solution might be to it. I gotta find somebody who can help me put this plan together, because I think I know what needs to happen. And dear God, it is so bright here. I can't tell if it's daylight, if it's nighttime. When is it? Do these folks never turn these lights off? This is insane. I think I'm here. I think I've pulled up to the right house now. Yep. Oh man, this place is way bigger than I thought it was going to be. Big gates. Man, looks like there might be a lot of security here. Let me get out and take a look. Oh wow, this place is monstrous. I have found the home of one Ben Morse, a former Wizard magazine writer, used to work for Marvel. Man, those benefits must have really paid off well. This place is monstrously huge. Big fence and everything with a giant M on it. Seems like it's unlocked. Let me just slide this. There we go. Let's move that latch, and I go. I'll just head on up to the door. Oh, hi there. What's this? This seems to be maybe it's a welcoming drone. That's what it looks like. Hi there. What's happening now? Oh shit. Oh fuck. Gotta run. Oh, this thing is shooting at me. God damn it. Gotta. Jesus Christ. Ben. Ow. Okay. That fucking sucked. I've made it. I've made it back to the house. I think I can. Door's locked. Hello? Anybody? There's nobody here. Wait, there's an LED board here. What's this? No weird internet friends allowed in house. Signed MM. Oh, well, all right. Wait a minute. I don't actually have to get in the house. Ben always records outside. You can always hear the stupid birds chirping and everything else in the background. I think I lost the drone. It seems to be kind of dumb, incapable of following me around. So I'll just sneak around here to the back side of the house. Yeah, he's not following me. That's good. Look at. Oh, this is it. This is the spot where Ben always sits out and listens to all the stupidity that's going on in the world, and we can always hear the lovely birds chirping in the background. Well, all right. Maybe he'll be home soon and can sit out with me for more than an hour. We got a lot to talk about. I have this plan to get rid of all these bright lights in Las Vegas. I think it'll help with my mission, you see, to understand the darkness of the DC universe if we can turn all these godforsaken lights down. I got a plan written out on all these napkins, and I can't wait for him to see it. So I'll just wait here for him, finalize a few things, and whenever he gets here, we'll be talking all about the next crisis.
I can't believe it's actually cold in Las Vegas. Las Vegas, this is supposed to be the desert. I didn't move out here for cold. I would have stayed in New Jersey with that crazy Mitch Oakham kid. Man, is there someone out here in my tiny Las Vegas backyard? Is that Russell Sellers of Sellers Points?
Oh, hey, Ben. I'm glad you're home. I've just been out here scribbling all these plans down on my Wendy's napkins, and I would have done it inside, but unlike everyone else I've visited lately, you have way better security in your house.
Yeah, obviously. I'm loaded from all the royalties I've made from all my wizard back pay, so I have a security system that's second to none. But yeah, man, it's clear you used all the napkins from Wendy's for jotting down your notes. That's why you've got food all over you.
Yes, I got that Baconator in me again, and it is just I'm on fire today, man. I've got so much to deal with here because I was just in New Jersey with Mitch, and he kind of revealed to me a lot of things about the DC universe, specifically through Identity Crisis, and I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, and I found myself reading this OMAC project business, and then I jumped into the countdown to what they called Infinite Crisis. I had no idea what I was in for, but man, things got real dark real quick, and it led me to a realization that maybe the world should be a little bit darker, and I decided that my next place to stop should be right here to visit you in bright, way too bright Las Vegas. And my God, do they ever turn these lights off? Is it this bright all the time?
You get used to it, but I'm glad you came here, Russell, because honestly, I've been hearing, through the grapevine, everything that's been going on with you. I've been very concerned, as you are my good, close, longtime personal friend, and I'm glad you came out here to beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, the entertainment capital of the world. So maybe I can try to talk some sense into you. I mean, hopefully you don't have any grandiose plans in your head, and we can just sit here and have a conversation.
That's exactly why I'm here. I needed your help with this because reading this Infinite Crisis omnibus that I just bought, it occurred to me that maybe Superman of Earth 2 had the right idea. You punch a hole in something and the world might actually be a little bit right again. So he punched a hole in reality. I thought maybe I should punch a hole in the Hoover Dam and darken this place up a little bit.
Well, Russell, you're certainly not the first person to think that punching holes in things is the solution to all of the world's problems. And I doubt you'll be the last. But before you run off to the Hoover Dam, let's talk about Infinite Crisis for a little while. Let me see if I can't calm you down a little, give you some explanation, provide some context, because it's not all about darkness. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and let me see if I can help you get there.
Oh, well, okay. I got a few minutes. I'll pull up the chair here. I mean, since your wife is a very effective security guard, she would not let me in the house.
No. She's I wouldn't mess with her.
Nope. I decided that was in my best interest because I got a dam to punch a hole in, and I didn't want to go into that one injured. So,
fair.
But yeah, this whole thing, it really does trace back to what happened in Identity Crisis with the death of Sue Dibney. She dies. Everything seems to go in a really wrong direction. Batman got all super paranoid and built an AI robot, a satellite in the sky to watch over all the superheroes. Then it turns out Max Lord has psychic abilities. Who knew? And he uses them to manipulate Superman into basically being a killing machine. And then
it was dark stuff back in 2004, 2005. I was just a cub reporter at the time for Wizard magazine. I just graduated college, and I got a job at Wizard in fall of 2004. And funny story, Russell, the very first day on the job, the first thing they gave me to do was talk to Dan DiDio about Countdown, which had been announced at that point as Countdown, but people didn't know what it was about. They just knew it was called Countdown. I actually got to write the story revealing that it was going to be called Countdown to Infinite Crisis. And then from there, I got to speak to Jeff Johns, to Greg Rucka, who was writing OMAC Project, to Gail Simone, who was writing Villains United, to Bill Willingham, who was writing Day of Vengeance. And I got to talk to all the architects of this scheme that you're alluding to. So I was actually I was baked in there from the very beginning.
So you were on the ground floor of this conspiracy when it started.
Yeah, I was.
You were there.
I was definitely as close to being a part of it as I could be without actually being a DC employee, which was pretty cool. It was a big assignment to get on my first day at Wizard, so I was pretty psyched about it. I was a huge DC fan, and I was ready to go.
I knew you were the right person to talk to about this. You were there when all these crazy, dark schemes were being made on all the DC fans. So now we're going to talk. Now we're going to get into it. I knew there was something to you. Now, with all this darkness that's been built up, what do you think the plan was here? Like, what was their goal with this?
So I think the point was there was a bunch of points, but number one, I think the point was, how do we bring the DC universe to its darkest point? And specifically, how do we get the big three, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, to the point where they have the biggest odds to possibly overcome? Because that's ultimately what Infinite Crisis was supposed to be. It was supposed to be, you've heard Avengers Disassembled called the worst day in the history of the Avengers. There's been various DC stories where it's the darkest day in DC history. But very much when Jeff Johns and his collaborators were crafting this story, the idea is this is the Justice League at their lowest point, and how do they find their way out of it? And that had started earlier with Identity Crisis and with Crisis of Conscience and JLA. The point was, the DC universe had always had this history as being kind of the bright, shiny universe. Like, if you look back to the 60s, I guess a lot of the knocks on the Justice League was always like, they're smiling, they're happy, they all get along so well, and they're just, they're buddies, they're super friends. And the idea here was, how can we take them as far away from as possible from that, so that, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, when they ultimately win, when they find a way to triumph, it means more, and it's a better story. So I got what they were trying to do with Infinite Crisis, and I was down with it. I thought it was a cool idea.
Now, you have a really tough thing happen right at the beginning. It shocked me when I read it, seeing Wonder Woman discovering, after the death of Blue Beetle, she kind of follows the breadcrumbs as they were to the seeming mastermind behind everything being Max Lord. He's got mental control over Superman, can make him kill almost seemingly at will, and says he'll never stop. So Wonder Woman snaps his neck. It was a big shocker of a moment. What kind of effect did that have on you? Because it's really eating at me, man.
I mean, the crazy thing for me was, it seemed from the kind of the through point they had done in Countdown, that this story, Infinite Crisis, was going to be a story about all the heroes against Max Lord, because he was the big villain of Countdown. He killed Blue Beetle. He had the connections. He had the power. It seemed like he was going to be unstoppable. So it seemed like you had a combination of kind of Max Lord, Brother Eye, all these things that were going on, it seemed like this was the big bad, like you said, like Max Lord was going to be the big bad of Infinite Crisis. So as big a deal as it was that Wonder Woman, killed him in cold blood and basically murdered someone to save Superman, I think the bigger thing for me, even somewhat on the inside, was like, oh, whoa, Max Lord's not the villain of this. Who is? Like, who's behind all this? And that's kind of the genius of Infinite Crisis, is that the first act of Infinite Crisis, from Countdown to all the miniseries, is really a big shell game. It's leading you in one direction, making you think it's one thing, and then right when you're comfortable with the story you feel like it's going to be told, it completely shifts.
And it really does, because I remember the first time I read through this story, and I was biting on Max Lord as being like the villain. Then whenever he dies, it's like, okay, what just happened here? And it felt like it was less a story about superheroes versus a villain, as it was more or less superheroes versus their own ideology, their own consciousness, because they really get into the ideas and ideals of each of these characters, specifically Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Batman, for several years leading into this, has become so paranoid that he doesn't trust anybody, including those who are supposed to be closest to him. And Batman himself actually makes a strong point in the first issue of Infinite Crisis that Superman is supposed to represent hope, idealism, and inspiration, and the last time he inspired anybody was when he was dead.
Yeah, that line's a killer.
And then you have Wonder Woman, of course, killing Max Lord, seemingly violating the very spirit of everything that these heroes are supposed to stand for. So every single one of them are really kind of at the lowest possible point. And then the real swerve happens when we discover that this seemingly, or these shadowy figures who've been watching the heroes all this time and talking about them like they knew them, are revealed to be the survivors, the last survivors of Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah, which, again, go ahead.
It's Alexander Luthor of Earth 3, Superboy Prime, Superman, and Lois Lane of Earth 2. And what we see is them deciding that it's too much, the heroes have gotten too dark, things have gone so terribly wrong that they feel like they have to intervene. Superman punches a hole in reality, which is kind of I kind of snicker a little bit at that, but it's a thing that happens, and they are able to come back to our Earth.
But the thing about Superman punching the hole in reality, I'm not going to totally defend it because it is kind of goofy, is that, again, the story that they're telling here is the story of the DC universe. And part of that story is even going back to the original Crisis. And I love the masterstroke that this was, like I said, they made us think it was just a story about Max Lord and all this dark stuff. No, it's a sequel to Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's a direct sequel to everything that happened there. And the whole Superman punching a hole in reality thing was because, pre-Crisis, like, these guys were ridiculously powerful. That was kind of the knock on DC, is that, Superman could do anything. He could juggle planets. He could do whatever he wanted. So the stuff with, punching a hole in reality, it's a little over the top, but it's it's like the calling card of, this is what the characters used to be like. This is who we're dealing with as far as Superman of Earth 2, Alexander Luthor of Earth 3, Superboy of Earth Prime. They are these incredibly overpowered characters, and they're kind of defined by their power and their simplistic point of view. And then you've got our modern heroes, which the whole thing is they've evolved. They've become three-dimensional. They couldn't stay the same characters they were in 1985. I mean, look at it. You and Todd looked at the original Crisis, and the whole idea of the original Crisis was to move these characters forward so they wouldn't be stagnant. They all got reinvented. Superman had Man of Steel. Batman had Frank Miller. Wonder Woman had George Perez. All these characters got deepened, but then we get to 2006, and they've run their course to the point where they've gotten dark. because they've gotten so deep. They've gotten so many layers that it's almost become too complex. And this is a story about Jeff Johns using Superman of Earth 2 and Superboy Prime to kind of give them a wake-up call and go, hey, you are the greatest superhero characters for a reason. I'm not taking a side here, Marvel versus DC, etc. But I think it was Jeff's genuine belief. He is the biggest fan of DC Comics and of their characters. And I think his intention with Infinite Crisis was to challenge these guys, particularly the big three, with their own past, with Superman of Earth 2, saying, you're not living up to your potential. What could you be? And that's what I think it's about. And
a lot of that makes sense. There's quite a bit within these pages. It's a dense read because there's so much that leads into even the main event. Like the main event is something that takes almost several years worth of reading just to get to. We started with Identity Crisis, but it's more than that. There was also Jeff Johns' Teen Titans and Flash runs that also had teases towards this.
Yep.
There was the Return of Donna Troy miniseries that came out, which also held several pieces of this puzzle. And then, of course, the other stuff that you mentioned, OMAC Project, the JLA Crisis of Conscience, Gail Simone's Villains United, the Day of Vengeance, just so much.
Oh, Rand Thanagar War.
And the Rand Thanagar War. And as it turns out, though, this is a huge conspiracy all dreamed up by Alexander Luthor of Earth 3. It's a plan that, frankly, he's the real villain here. And it almost, if you read some of the companion issues to Infinite Crisis, you feel sort of mildly bad, I guess, for Superboy Prime because he was manipulated so hard into being a tool of destruction for Alexander Luthor.
But at the end of the day, I mean, doesn't it just make sense, though, that a Luthor is the ultimate villain?
It really does.
This was, going back to Crisis on Infinite Earths, this was the one good Luthor, and it kind of strikes to the core of the Luthor character that no matter how good his intentions are, he ultimately is a villain at the core and can't help himself. And I think you get, to your point, you get two very different kinds of bad guys in Infinite Crisis. You get Alexander Luthor, who is the greatest mastermind in the history of DC, and in some ways an analog for Jeff himself, in the sense that Jeff and everyone he's working with, I mean, you have to understand, you described it, Russell, these pieces were being moved for years before Infinite Crisis. Stuff was in play to set this up going years back. And the thing is, just speaking internally from my own experience at the time, being in the comic book business, the sense was that DC didn't do stuff like that. If you look at Marvel, Marvel was always the one that was able to pull together these giant shared universe stories because it was designed that way. The Marvel universe was designed to be an interlocking thing. I mean, look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the way it works in a way no other cinematic universe has. DC was kind of the big, clumsy heroes who could have the big cosmic stories, but they weren't elaborate. And Jeff, the ones who were really the masterminds behind this, it was Jeff, it was Judd Winnick was involved. I know Greg Rucka was involved. Jeff Loeb was involved at one point. Brad Meltzer, and to his credit, Dan DiDio was the one who really got all the balls moving in place. But these guys and girls, they came up with a multi-year, multifaceted plan to basically tell the ultimate story that the DC universe could tell. And that's one type of villain with Alexander Luthor. Then on the other side, you've got Superboy Prime, who is pure just fanboy gone nuts. He's just, all emotion, no thought whatsoever. And it's kind of a knock on the fact that, I mean, think about it. You guys talked about Crisis on Infinite Earths, Superboy Prime was pretty much a blank slate when he was introduced. He exists for about 3 comics, and then he's off to paradise. So the point was, this was not a character with a lot of layers to him. So the fact that Alexander Luthor could manipulate him so easily, the fact that he did become such a pure, like, almost tragic figure, it made sense.
It does. He's one of my favorite villains in all of DC, simply because I think he represents exactly what you're talking about, the fanboy gone nuts, the one who feels like he owns these characters. He knows them better than anybody else, and he should be the one to direct them where they need to go. But the thing is, he doesn't have any good ideas.
And better believe, I think that's intentional. I think he's absolutely intended to be kind of a not like a shot at the fans, but a little bit of an avatar of, like,
he's a certain segment of the fandom.
Yeah, but it's like, take a look at yourself. You know, like, take a look at yourself in the mirror. Look at how you're behaving. You're being a little ridiculous, and I think Superboy Prime was intended to have certain segments of the fan base take a little bit of time to examine themselves.
Any looking at Twitter would tell you immediately that didn't work out at all.
No, not at all.
But
Superboy Prime won in the end, Russell.
He really did. Even though he ultimately does wind up getting sent back to his Earth, and everyone's afraid of him. Not in this story, but in later stories.
Yep.
But in this particular version of the character, he starts out seemingly like, you know, he's a little bit whiny, sure, at the beginning, but his intentions seem good. And then we get that moment where he is finally able to confront the one he's fixated on, his the source of his ire that he thinks is you know, the culmination of everything that's wrong with this Earth. Connor Kent, the Superboy of this Earth, Con-El, if you will. He looks at him as a worthless, do-nothing version of Superboy who is nothing but a grand disappointment, and now that Superboy Prime is here, he thinks of himself as the replacement for Superboy, and confronts him at the Kent farm and gets into like a full-on throwdown fight with him. What was your take on that as a moment or as an event in this comic?
So Connor Kent has been one of my favorite characters since I was a kid reading Death of Superman. I thought Superboy was the coolest thing to come out of Death of Superman. It's interesting and kind of ironic because I feel like he was a character who was created so of the moment in the 90s, just with the haircut and the earring and the leather jacket and everything. He was everything that all of us thought was cool in 1994. And he shouldn't have aged well. But he did, in large part because work that writers like Carl Kiesel, who created him, Ron Mars did some impressive work with him, Peter David, of course, in Young Justice, and then Jeff himself in Teen Titans really took the time to evolve this kid into a 3-dimensional character. And again, getting back to what I said and answering your question, the fight between these two characters could not be more emblematic of a fight between Silver Age DC and Modern Age DC. Connor is the quintessential modern DC character. He's got a lot going on. His motivation is very complex. He's not a Boy Scout. He is very just complicated and has a lot to him. Superboy Prime, on the other hand, is a Silver Age DC character. And the ironic thing is, in 2006, the Silver Age DC character is very much the villain.
Yeah, and it comes across that way because, like you said, Superboy Prime seems very like 2-dimensional, honestly, and that is by design. He works out better that way, I think. You've also got Connor Kent, who is dealing with a lot of emotional fallout from stuff that happened to him just prior to Infinite Crisis. He's now fully aware that he is a clone of both Lex Luthor and Superman. his Lex side took over at one point. I believe he was manipulated into being evil during Jeff Johns' Teen Titans run. And he comes out of that, but no longer trusts himself to be a hero anymore.
Right. Yeah, no, he's lost faith in himself. And he's basically, when Infinite Crisis starts, he's just sitting on the Kent farm cooling his heels because, yeah, like you said, he doesn't trust himself to go into action. And they got that great... In the early issues of Infinite Crisis, one of the things I love about this story, and I got to say, I reread it pretty recently, like within the last few months to prepare for this. And I have to say, I think I contend that it ages pretty well. Like, I actually...
Yes.
I enjoyed it more this read than I think I did back when it was coming out at the time.
It's timeless.
Just some of the beats that hit with the really like early stuff, just like that first issue, how dark everything is. The big three fighting, the freedom fighters getting massacred by the secret society. Just that moment where everything's falling apart on the moon, and then you see Uncle Sam like face down in the water. It's brilliant storytelling. And another great moment from early on is they show Connor on the farm, like looking like he's going to take off the shirt and like gonna go become Superboy. And then he just doesn't, he can't do it. He's just been so, like all the other heroes in this story, he's been so beaten down by the tragedy that's happened to him that he's useless. And he needs to rise back up to the occasion.
He needed something to push him to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And speaking of the secret society, I guess they're just called the secret society in this, but it is the secret society of supervillains.
Yeah.
A group of villains who all at one point had discovered the identities of the Justice League members, and they had their minds erased, which of course was a precursor to what we see in Identity Crisis. Well, now they have all that knowledge back, and they are using it. They're using it to their advantage, which is something that actually happens in the Crisis of Conscience JLA story leading into Infinite Crisis. And that was one of those mind-blowing moments that led everything back to Identity Crisis, to what I had just read before. Masterful storytelling from Jeff Johns. But he takes it one further and shows us that the reality is Alexander Luthor of Earth 3 had found a way out of that pocket dimension that he and the other survivors of the original Crisis had been living in, thanks to Superboy Prime being manipulated and punching his way out of it. So he started coming to the main Earth, or coming to this version of the DC Earth, for several months, disguising himself as this Earth's Lex Luthor, reforming the secret society, having Superboy Prime move planets around, moving the center of the universe around even, because, as we discussed a minute ago, because Silver Age. And that's what starts the Rann-Thanagar War, getting the corpse of the... This is the crazy one for me. Getting the corpse of the Anti-Monitor to rebuild the tower, or one of the towers from the original Crisis, to use it as a conduit, as he originally tells Superman and Lois Lane of Earth 2 that he's going to rebuild Earth 2 and make it a better world, and everything would just be folded in it. It would all be fine again. But his actual plan is to create a new Earth that he and Superboy Prime consider to be perfect.
Right.
And that's the ultimate evil plan of Infinite Crisis, but it was all a masterstroke plan by Alexander Luthor that even involved Max Lord, Checkmate, OMAC, or the OMAC sleeper agents, and of course Brother Eye.
Yeah, everything that led up to Infinite Crisis plays a role in Infinite Crisis. Nothing is wasted. You can argue that some of it is a little forced. Like, I would say the Day of Vengeance stuff, where they're like, "Oh, we're gathering magic to like fuel the machine that we're doing." Like, that's kind of goofy. But still, they gave it a shot. Like, they tried to tie everything together, which I just thought was ballsy and cool.
That was probably the best they could have done involving the magical side of DC into the story.
Right.
It's not the best part of it, of course, and of course I also think that the Ranthanagar War is another piece that's a bit forced, though it does at least distract the Green Lantern Corps, and keeps them from like getting involved in the main event. But it was still also cool to see an event that takes place after Green Lantern Rebirth, and Hal Jordan being back in the mix, and him getting to put his 2 cents in to the heroes having another opportunity to mind wipe those same villains, and Hal finally letting us know what his position on it was then and what it is now, and it's so just, it was wonderful to me to see Jeff Johns writing, the greatest Green Lantern of them all, and making him seem like the real voice of reason in the room, while everybody else is like very hard one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, one of the cool things about Infinite Crisis, when you compare it to Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I'll just say as an aside for a brief second that the original Crisis was the story that got me into DC. And for a little context on that, it was basically, I was always a Marvel Comics fan growing up. I read DC a bit. Obviously, like I said, I loved Superboy. I loved Wally West. I loved some other characters. But for me, I was mainly Marvel. Then when I was in college, I got a gift certificate to New England Comics in Boston, where I grew up. And I wanted to get the biggest book on the shelves because I thought that would be the coolest thing to read. So I got Crisis on Infinite Earths. And some people would be overwhelmed not knowing any DC history and reading Crisis on Infinite Earths. To me, it was a huge selling point because I wanted to learn about all these characters. But comparing the original Crisis to Infinite Crisis, one of the neat things that they get to do is that the big guns of the DC universe all get to play a big part. Because that's one thing about the original Crisis. I mean, Superman has a role to play, but Hal Jordan's not even in it. Batman barely does anything. Wonder Woman's kind of ancillary. So with Infinite Crisis, they change that. All 4 of those characters get big moments. And a lot of characters get big moments. And I would argue that's one of the strengths of Infinite Crisis and the way Jeff Johns writes in general, is his ability to build to these big moments and to have characters have big moments that really mean something.
I would say that this is a story without necessarily a central character.
No, there's no star.
There is no star. There is.
The DC universe is the star.
Exactly. Like, it's the entire DC universe. In my mind, this is the quintessential DC universe story.
Absolutely. I think this whole story is a love letter to DC Comics and all this stuff. In many ways, the original Crisis was that. It was Marv Wolfman and George Perez's opportunity to celebrate literally every character in the DC universe. And I think one of the impressive things about Infinite Crisis is it might not involve quite as many characters as the original Crisis, which I think honestly is impossible.
It comes close.
But it comes real close. And it has, one of the cool things too is you alluded to the Society's role earlier. Yeah. Another thing that separates the second Crisis from the original Crisis is, in the original Crisis, you really had, you had the Anti-Monitor as the big villain with his shadow demons, and they were kind of the bad guys, and all the villains teamed up with all the heroes. What's cool in Infinite Crisis is you have the villains being villains.
Oh yeah.
So it's totally. You said earlier, this is a story about good guys against their own failings, but there's a big element of good guys versus bad guys in Infinite Crisis. You get to see every DC villain fight every DC hero on multiple occasions, especially in that climactic battle of Metropolis. And it's really it's built to very well.
It is the climax of this story really is built to be that hard hitting moment, and there are a lot of stories that have been told about this story over the years. And one of those stories has to do with one of the biggest moments, one of the biggest and most heart-wrenching moments, I think, of the story. And it's when Connor Kent, Superboy, has decided, once and for all, he is stepping back up to be the hero that he knows he can be. he, the Teen Titans, and several other heroes are taking on Superboy Prime directly, who seems to be getting more and more powerful as he goes because he's now exposed to yellow sunlight, and it's pushing him over the top. And he winds up killing several heroes throughout the course of this, and at first he does it accidentally, and he's horrified by his own actions, but it's in that moment that he seems to be driven fully insane. And he just goes on this, tear of violence, just unbridled anger and destruction. And it's ultimately the fight between he and Connor that destroys the monitor tower and leaves Connor dead at the end of it, which was that had to have been a huge, like a real blow to you as a big Connor Kent fan.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, because of my position, because I had a relationship with Jeff, I was getting to read these scripts in advance, like months in advance, and I was getting to know plot points months in advance. So I knew the death of Connor Kent was coming. It still hit me very hard. Like, I was like, this is one of my guys. This is one of my favorite characters, one of my heroes. And it was a rough crisis for me because we technically lost Wally West. Yep. He goes away for a little while. Connor Kent gets killed. So a lot of my favorite characters are getting, kind of scattered to the winds. And there was a lot behind that. And a lot of credit has to go to Jeff Johns for not being afraid to kind of kill his darlings, so to say, because he had been the writer on Wally West for years, and he had done a lot of great work with Wally, and he was willing to move him off the table because it was a big moment, because certain people said, a Flash has to die in every crisis. And I do think Wally was on the chopping block at one point. I think he was supposed to. I'm not remembering this 100%. It was over 12 years ago. But I'm pretty sure in early drafts that Wally died and got replaced.
Well, he gets replaced.
He gets replaced by Bart.
Yep.
But I think he was his disappearance was not supposed to be as kind of open to interpretation. Like, I think he was supposed to die the same way that Barry Allen did.
It would be the second time that he's died in a crisis.
Right, because he died in 0 Hour.
In 0 Hour and came right back. And speaking of that, that's something else that I wanted to get to. In 0 Hour, Greg and I, as you know, we talked about how we thought Parallax might have been right.
Right.
Because he wanted to recreate this, perfect world. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there are some parallels there between Parallax and the Superman of Earth 2, who was only going along with this plan because he thought his Earth could be brought back and be made basically into the perfect Earth?
It's interesting. It's an interesting comparison to make. I think the bigger point that was being made with Superman of Earth 2 that was not necessarily there with Parallax. I think Parallax, it was just the idea that I think it was more of a plot point. I think that they were saying something bigger with Superman of Earth 2. What they were essentially saying was, as much as nostalgia is great and we all long for the good old days, it's not that simple. We can't just go back to the way things were and, revert to childhood or revert to our old ways and everything's just going to be fine. And that's why that's a lesson Superman of Earth 2 learns over the course of Infinite Crisis, that he can't just have things back to the way they were. Things have evolved. And one of the best moments in Infinite Crisis, in my opinion, is when Superman of Earth 2 goes to Batman of our Earth and tries to get him on his side and basically says, in his very simplistic way, like, if we create Earth 2, everything's going to be better, everybody's better, and Batman pointedly asks him, is Dick Grayson better on Earth 2? And Superman of Earth 2 cannot say he was.
One of my favorite lines from the book is that, in that moment, when I believe what he asked is, Superman of Earth 2 is telling Bruce that everything on this Earth is a corrupted version of his Earth. Like everything, it just seems to corrupt everyone. So Bruce asks him, "Is Dick Grayson of this Earth a corrupted version of yours?" And Superman of Earth 2 answers him, "No."
No, and it's a beautiful moment because Dick Grayson, at the heart of the DC universe, is that ray of hope. Even more so, I'd argue, than Superman, who, is supposed to be this beacon of everything that is good in the DC universe. The original Robin was the light in the darkest part of the DC universe, the Batman part of the DC universe. So Dick Grayson always stood for the idea that nothing is beyond redemption. And the fact that he grew into Nightwing, the fact that he grew beyond just being Robin and became this incredible hero as Nightwing, a hero who took the best of Superman and Batman and combined them. There's another great moment in Infinite Crisis. It's really actually a great Dick Grayson story. But there's another great moment where Batman basically says, like, Dick, you need to lead the charge against all this evil because people don't trust me, but they trust you. Everyone trusts you because you're just so good. And then there's that great moment where he goes to Titan's Tower and no one shows up and it's just him and Superboy and et cetera, et cetera. But it's just such a great Dick Grayson story.
That's also
and it wasn't supposed to be.
Exactly. That was my next lead in. It's kind of funny that Dick and Superboy are standing there together because the scuttlebutt has always been, the rumor was always that certain bald individuals at DC Comics wanted to kill Dick Grayson, really had it in for this character for a long time. And through some other means, other people negotiating or saying that was just a wrong-headed move, Dick Grayson, Nightwing, was allowed to survive Infinite Crisis, but the original story was that he was slated to die in this story instead of Superboy, Connor Kent. So, as someone who was there, who talked to Jeff Johns, knows where all the bodies are buried, which I think they're in the Hoover Dam still. I need you to tell me this, Ben. You were there. You know the truth. You know where all the skeletons in the closet. Let's open this sucker up and get them out. What's the truth?
There's a reason that Dick Grayson gets so many great moments in the course of Infinite Crisis. There's a reason Connor Kent gets so many great moments over the course of Infinite Crisis. And that is because all the way up to the issue where Connor ultimately dies, there was an internal debate, struggle going on over which one of them was going to die. So they built it so that if Dick had died in that issue, or if it happened as it unfolded and Connor died in that issue, it would have been appropriately built up on both sides. They both had incredible stories to be told. I don't know how down to the wire it went, but it's my understanding that it was pretty tight. That when Infinite Crisis started, I think Dick Grayson was still slated to die. It's weird, man. I don't know the origins of certain people's dislike for that character. I will say that it extends beyond that, and it's a fundamental dislike of, not dislike, dislike's too strong a word, but I think there was a sense that, especially in this story, the Teen Titans were expendable. The original Teen Titans. The Wally Wests, the Dick Graysons, these were characters that we could sacrifice to kind of make a point that, like spur on the original heroes. And I think of the story that certain other people were trying to tell was DC is a generational universe, and you've got heroic legacies being passed on from character to character. And that's what sets it apart from some other universes. So Dick Grayson, as a character who was the kind of the avatar of that generation, kind of the original sidekick who was the one who grew up and became an even greater hero, he had too much value. Killing him off was a waste. But showing why he could be such a great character. Now that was worthwhile. And that's what I think John's attempted to do with Infinite Crisis, was not just save Dick Grayson through his own behind-the-scenes maneuvering. And yes, I do think that Connor Kent was offered up as something of a sacrificial lamb to get Dick Grayson off the block. But I think ultimately what he was trying to do was show this is why these characters are great. And both Dick and Connor step up to the plate in different ways. They both ultimately prove why they're worthwhile heroes. But yeah, we came real close to losing Dick Grayson in Infinite Crisis.
That would have been, I think, just one of those watershed moments where you start to wonder, can I stick with DC Comics after they did something like this? And that, I mean, the death of Connor Kent was still tough for me.
But it was a good death. It was a good death, and I think it was a story that Jeff had built to. That he had earned through the work in Teen Titans and through the stuff he'd done with Connor was meant to build him up to the point where his death meant something. And I think that, well, it would have certainly affected readers had Dick Grayson been the one to take the bullet. I just don't think that was his story. Dick Grayson's story was not that he was on this redemptive quest like Connor and that sacrificing himself would prove something that no one believed. Everyone believed that Dick Grayson was a great hero. That's the whole point. So he doesn't have anything to really prove. Connor is the one with something to prove. So Connor, taking the hit and ultimately sacrificing his life, that proves that Connor Kent's a true hero and gives a greater context to his story.
And speaking of heroes that we lost, we've alluded to it throughout. I know that you're a huge Wally West fan. So how did you like the big hero moment that Wally gets in this story when he, Bart, Jay, and a few other speedsters snatch away Superboy Prime into the Speed Force to try and imprison him, only for him to emerge a short time later wearing a take on the Anti-Monitor's armor, and with a now aged up Bart Allen wearing the classic Scarlet Speedster outfit?
I didn't love it. I thought it was forced. I thought that...
Speed forced, if you will.
Speed forced. I thought if you look back to the original Crisis and Barry Allen's death, if you are any sort of comics historian, you know that Barry Allen was at a low point when Crisis hit. His title had been canceled, his popularity was waning, and probably the best thing they could do with him was give him this awesome heroic sacrifice moment in Crisis on Infinite Earths. It made sense to me. A lot of people think it was a bold move, and it was. I mean, they killed off the hero who eventually kickstarted the Silver Age, but I thought it was smart. It was savvy. It made sense. This was where Barry was at the time. This is what he can contribute. I think when they did Infinite Crisis, like with Zero Hour, there was just this feeling like, oh, well, we got to do something to the Flash. That's what we do in crises, even though there'd only been like one or two at that point. So I think they were like, oh, well, we gotta get rid of Wally West. I think there was a lot of miles left in the Wally West character at the time of Infinite Crisis. I also don't think Bart Allen was ready to become the Flash. I think Wally, post Crisis on Infinite Earths, his story was leading there. He was ready to graduate and become the Flash. I think Bart Allen was doing fine as Kid Flash in Teen Titans. There was a lot of cool stories left to be told with him as Kid Flash. So I wasn't a huge fan of how this all played out. I thought it was forced. I thought that it was, we got to do something with the Flash. Well, let's switch his identity the same way we did in the first Crisis. It reeked to me of like, it wasn't the most creative solution. And I will say as a quick aside that you mentioned the Anti-Monitor armor, you mentioned the Anti-Monitor corpse. I'll go on the record as saying I think Jeff Johns is obsessed with the Anti-Monitor.
A little bit.
He uses him every opportunity he can get. And the beauty of it is he usually does a damn good job with it. You look at Sinestro Corps War, you look at the Dark Side War, like all the stories he tells them are great. But man, he loves him some Anti-Monitor.
He had a lot of good ideas with that character, and more so he did his Jeff Johns thing, which was to take a character that most people had either forgotten about or written off or said, there's only so much that could ever be done with them. And Jeff says, hold my beer.
Basically. Essentially, as we said. And I'm always of two minds about it, because part of me, as such a big fan of the original Crisis, and I mentioned this actually on, of all places, Marvel Age Masterclass, when Nick and I were talking about Galactus, I talked about how I thought Anti-Monitor and Galactus, for that matter, should be one and done villains. They shouldn't be used again. And I'll stand by that. I do think there's a coolness to the Anti-Monitor being the one-time ultimate villain of the DC universe who, when he's defeated, stays defeated. But I will concede that what Jeff's done with him has always been pretty freaking cool.
It is. He's, in my mind, like Galactus, he should be kind of on that pedestal of the ultimate power of their respective universes.
Right.
That's where they each sit, as far as I am concerned.
Yeah.
Now we've talked about the grand conspiracy of Infinite Crisis, the saving of Dick Grayson, and the unfortunate death of Connor Kenton, the albeit temporary disappearance of Wally West. Again. We got to get to the big climactic moment of this series, and that's when Superman of Earth 2 is now aware of what Alexander Luthor of Earth 3 was trying to do. He sees how insane Superboy Prime has gone and how corrupted everything has become. Unfortunately for him, his Lois Lane dies anyway, no matter what they did to try and save her. And he comes to the realization that he essentially backed the wrong pony. And he teams up with Superman of Earth 1 to fight Superboy Prime directly, taking him out in deep space, even flying him through. I think this was more than a little, like, maybe on the nose symbolic, flying him through the Red Sun Rao that Krypton used to revolve around, crashing onto the planet Mogo and having a fist fight, essentially, between Earth 2 Superman and Superboy Prime, that ultimately leads to the death of the Earth 2 Superman. But everyone's depowered, so Superboy Prime could be taken down and ultimately imprisoned in a science cell placed in the heart of a red sun, guarded by the Green Lantern Corps. So, what did you make of this ending? How do you feel about the ending for Superman of Earth 2, and where Jeff winds up leaving Superboy Prime?
So let me answer that in reverse, because I have a cool story about the Superboy of Earth Prime ending, Superboy Prime ending. So I was super fortunate. Like, look, dude, I don't take for granted the fact that getting to be close to Jeff Johns during this process. First of all, I just think Jeff is one of the greatest, most creative, most innovative writers in the history of the comics medium. I think he's brilliant. He also happens to be an incredibly good guy, and he took me very much under his wing during my early years working in comics, and I'm eternally grateful for that. And it led to a lot of very cool moments for me. And one of the coolest was I was in a crappy apartment at the time, and it was very late on the East Coast, and Jeff had just finished the final issue of Infinite Crisis, the script, and he needed someone to read it, and he knew I was still awake, so he emailed it to me. So I was one of the first people to get to read the script to the final issue of Infinite Crisis, and I got to, give my commentary on it. I talked about it, and I appreciate to hell that he valued my opinion. And when it came to the ending, being as big a fanboy of the original Crisis as I was, he had already written the ending. The ending was there. It was Superboy in the science cell, Green Lantern's watching him giving that great creepy line about, I've been in worse prisons, I can get out. That was all already there. The only thing that I will take credit for, that I did suggest, was I said the original Crisis ends with that great sequence of it starts on the eyeball of the Psycho Pirate, and then it just keeps going out, out, out till you're looking at a world. I said, wouldn't it be cool if Infinite Crisis ended with a shot of Oa, where Superboy Prime's in prison, and in a direct parallel to the original Crisis, you just keep pulling in, and just as the first shot on the last page of the original Crisis is the eye of the Psycho Pirate, the last thing we see in Infinite Crisis is the eye of Superboy Prime, and it glows red. So that's the one thing I'll take credit for, because I did come up with that, and I thought it was pretty freaking cool. And I'd still, to this day, think it's pretty cool, and not that many people noticed it, which kind of sucked. But I thought it was pretty neat.
No, I'm looking at that right now, and that's a really cool thing that you suggested they do, and it's like I love that whole scene, especially with him carving the S shield into his chest.
Into his chest. Yeah, that was all Jeff and Phil. They're just brilliant. But
speaking of that, we got to talk about the art.
Yeah, before we get to the art, I don't want to step off the Superman of Earth 2 death.
Yeah. You got to talk about that.
Just to talk about that real quick. There was something so optimistic and nice about the ending of Crisis on Infinite Earths. The fact that Superman of Earth 2, the original superhero, got his paradise. He got to go off, and that was the last we were ever going to see of him. He's living out the rest of his days with his Lois. That's why I think it meant so much more, his sacrifice in this story. I was almost, as a reader, when I read it the first time, I was almost kind of numb at this point, because we'd already lost Connor, and to me that was the big emotional loss of Infinite Crisis. So when Superman of Earth 2 dies, it almost, in some ways, I hate to say it, but it in some ways feels like an afterthought. It's like, well, we haven't seen this character in many years. He doesn't matter as much to us as Connor. Rereading it recently with a little more context, I understand what a big moment it is for Superman of Earth 2. For him, the original hero, again, to basically say to Superman of our Earth, and by extension, the rest of the heroes of our Earth, that, all right, you guys having a chance to do this right is worth me laying down my life. Him saying that you guys, he says, the whole point of the story is, you guys got so dark, you failed so much, I have to come back and fix things. And now instead he's saying, I trust you to fix things. But at the same time, there's a very strong element of, but don't screw this up.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of a neat sacrifice when he dies. And if I'm not mistaken, if you have it in front of you, you can tell me, George Perez draws his death scene, right? I think.
I'm not sure if it's specifically said who draws like which pages,
right?
At least in this edition I'm working with.
I'm pretty sure it's George Perez, and I think that's nice and appropriate given George Perez's place in DC history.
What's kind of amazing, though, is how well Phil Jimenez and George Perez's art fit together.
Oh, compliment. Yeah. And even Jerry Ordway, who also...
Yes. So that whole final issue, is tremendously drawn. It's one of the... I mean, every issue was drawn just wonderfully. And if I think that if we're going to give credit to anybody for how this issue really works, it has to be Phil Jimenez. There are a lot of people on this final issue, though. Phil Jimenez, Ivan Rice, Joe Bennett, and George Perez all have pages in the final issue of Infinite Crisis.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the cool thing for Phil Jimenez, who is also, to totally sound like a name dropper here, because that's kind of my gimmick, is also a dear friend of mine. George Perez was his hero. He wanted to be George Perez. So the opportunity for Phil to draw this story, basically to do the follow-up to his idol's biggest work, was not something he took lightly. And he really, really brought his A game. And I think the only thing that was cooler than Phil getting to pick up where Perez left off is that he actually got to partner with him on this story. And I think the Perez stuff and the Ordway stuff and the Ivan Rice stuff and all the other stuff, but especially the Perez and Ordway stuff, really lent a cool factor to Infinite Crisis, because it was like, here are guys from the original story kind of coming back to tell a story that's big enough to warrant their coming back. So I thought that was kind of neat. And of course, George Perez is just probably my favorite. Him and Jim Lee are my 1 and 2. I don't know who's 1 and who's 2, but Perez is just great, and he did a great job. But yeah, Phil deserves a ton of credit for being able to live up to the bar set.
And man, there are so many good sequences throughout this issue. I'm just kind of like flipping through it just to appreciate the art for what it is. And I think, as we've alluded to, we know that Superboy Prime is defeated here, but Alexander Luthor, of course, is also defeated. Even though a new Earth is kind of formed here, and if I'm not mistaken, it's also like a quick kind of rebirth of the multiverse, though they don't really go into a lot of like detail on that just yet. That's saved for a later story, I think. This new Earth has kind of straightened out a little bit of the continuity as well, or restored some things that Zero Hour had done away with. And ultimately left our heroes in a little bit more of an optimistic place. But one of my favorite scenes in this is that Alexander Luthor of Earth 3 did not die in the climactic battle. He manages to escape and tries to go into hiding in Gotham City. But there was one really big mistake that he made in his impersonating of Lex Luthor at the beginning of this story. He was putting together the Secret Society of Supervillains, and one major villain in particular tried to get in on it, and Lex wouldn't, or that version of Lex wouldn't let him. So the Joker is a bit pissed off about not getting in on all the fun. He's just kind of been an ancillary character in all this. But Lex Luthor of this Earth, the quote-unquote real Lex Luthor, finds Joker and says, you know what, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to help you find this Alexander Luthor of Earth 3. And he finds him in a dark back alley at Gotham City, and Lex lays it out for him, saying, and I quote, "You made a lot of mistakes. You underestimated Superman, Superboy, me, but the biggest one, you didn't let the Joker play." And Joker murders him right there in that alley in brutal fashion. And it is one of my all-time favorite moments of this story. So,
well, I think the cool thing is there we talk about how Superman gets a big moment, Batman gets a big moment, Wonder Woman gets a big moment, Green Lantern gets a big moment. All these important characters get big moments, Nightwing, Superboy, etc. But it wouldn't be complete if the two alpha villains of the DC universe, Lex Luthor and the Joker, didn't get their moment as well. And you described it beautifully. Like it's such a satisfying moment where it's like the story is said, like, these are the greatest heroes of all time. Also, here are two of the greatest villains, and here's why.
And there it was. It was. I would almost swear that I could tell who drew this particular sequence. It feels like an Ivan Rice sequence to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I could be wrong on that, and if I am, Phil, Ivan, anybody who might be listening to this, hey, Rags Morales listened to the last one. So if I can get Rags to listen to it, I'm hoping that one of the artists on this tremendous story will give it a listen and tell us who drew what sequences in issue 7 of Infinite Crisis, because we really want to know, and I particularly want to know who drew. I want to know if I'm right that Ivan Rice also drew this sequence that is also going to stand up as one of my all-time favorite scenes of any event. The big three, Bruce, Clark, and Diana, they've all kind of reached this moment at the end of the story where they're going to go basically on little self-discovery missions. They're going to put away their superhero identities for a while. In fact, they're walking on this pier in Gotham City in their street clothes. There's no superhero symbology to be found anywhere. Bruce is going to retrace his steps that he took to become Batman, and on this journey with him will be Tim Drake and Dick Grayson. Following his plunge through a red sun, Superman doesn't have powers anymore, so Clark Kent is just a regular guy. And he figures that his powers probably will come back at some point, but until then, he's going to enjoy his time off. And, get better at his day job, spend time with Lois, just, getting in touch with his human side now that he really is human. And Diana is going to have a similar journey of self-discovery, and getting back to her roots, which all seems to be the large point here. And I love the ending of Bruce sailing off, Diana flying away in her invisible jet, and Clark and Lois standing there on the pier together again as the sun is shining on Gotham, and Gotham of all places. And it feels like everything is going to be okay.
Yeah, and as I spoke about earlier, I think this was ultimately the point we were building to. But the years of preparation, all the terrible things that happened, all the darkness, it just seemed, I know in the build-up, one of the things that DC, Dan DiDio, Jeff Johns were dealing with was everyone was saying, you're making these characters too dark. You're making these characters too dark. It was a criticism on Identity Crisis. It was just, this is too dark. This is not the DC universe. Kudos to these guys for knowing that their end game was always to have the happy ending. But the happy ending means so much more when it has to be earned, when you have to walk through fire to get it, where you have to sacrifice all these things. So that beautiful moment you described with Bruce sailing off, with Diana flying off, with Clark and Lois, happy in the end, it means so much more because they had to go through hell to get this. And they were at their lowest point. They were at their darkest point, and then they showed why they are some of the greatest characters in the history of fiction, because they're resilient, and they bounce back, and they defeat evil, and they win the day, and they get their happy ending.
And it's so satisfying. The whole thing just feels like it's really a testament to the power and ability of these characters to ultimately get us from our darkest, lowest point all the way here, and even give us a giant, beautifully rendered splash page, which had to be George Perez, drawing all the remaining heroes who were going to now take up the mantle, as it were, of the big three, with Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman off the table. Clark even says that he feels like the world's in good hands, and you see this giant splash page of all the remaining superheroes. And it's tremendous. It is as we alluded to before, a testament to how Jeff Johns sees the DC universe as being one of legacy. Mm-hmm. So here are all these legacy characters taking up for the big three. And I couldn't have felt more optimistic by the end of this story. So, you know what, Ben? Maybe you were right this whole time. Maybe I've been going about this all wrong. Maybe everything really is going to be okay. Maybe we all do need a little bit a little bit more light.
I'll say this, Russell. As a DC Comics fan, the end of Infinite Crisis is probably my favorite moment in the history of the DC universe. It's so nice, and it felt like the perfect ending. They could have ended the DC universe there, and I would have been satisfied. But, well, that's not exactly how it goes.
Well, I heard about the direct follow up to Infinite Crisis, a little weekly series called 52.
Oh yeah,
and that was really well done.
Very well done. I got to be on the ground floor of that one too. I got to go out to. I somehow conned Wizard into sending me out to WonderCon, where Jeff Johns, Greg Rucka, Mark Waid, Grant Morrison, and Steve Wacker, the editor, were all meeting, and I got to sit in on a 52 story conference. And of course, because I had to, I got a picture with all of them, which is one of my favorite pictures. To this day, me with Team 52, and then both Wacker and I were at Marvel before 52 ended.
Well, there was that, and the 1 year later stuff I thought was largely good. I was a big fan of Superman Up, and Away.
Good story. I think 1 year later was a bit of a mixed bag. It was a really cool concept, and some of the stories were executed really well. Mm-hmm. Some of them, not as much.
Yeah, the Nightwing stuff wasn't very good. But I was a fan of Batman Face to Face that James Robinson wrote. Still enjoy that story to this day. I actually never read the Wonder Woman stuff from around that time. I'd like to go find out what that was like. And I've only just recently started reading Flash, the Fastest Man Alive, which was Bart Allen's 1 year later story. Not too shabby so far. I mean, not like groundbreaking or amazing, but I think serviceable. And it's only a 13-issue story. So all of that on the, hopefully slowly improving DC Universe app. But, all that to say, it feels like I'm able to walk away from this feeling very optimistic and hopeful, are maybe all these crises are behind me. Maybe this can, as you said, this could be the end of my journey.
I only wish that were true, Russell. I only wish that were true.
What are you talking about, man? What?
I think you still have a few more steps to take on this journey. And I will remain here, living in the moment of the end of Infinite Crisis in beautiful, scenic Las Vegas. I think you've got more crises to undertake. And despite what the name might tell you, this is not the final one.
Oh, God. No. Well, maybe it's not so bad. Did Jeff Johns do another one?
You know what, Russell? It's getting late, man. I think I got to go inside.
Don't leave me
you can hang
on.
out here a little bit longer if you want, but I think you got to go.
Hang on now.
Go find your way, man.
Don't leave me like this. No, Ben, come back. You did. Who did? Okay, I got a smartphone. I can look at this real quick. Final Crisis author. Oh no. No. Ben, you some bitch, get back here. No, you can't leave me like that.
Life springs eternal on a garden neon street.
Okay, back in the car, about to get back on the journey, but Ben ran into the house so fast that I didn't get a chance to find out how I could tweet him and tell him all about the future of this road trip, because apparently it's going to have to continue on for a little while longer. But I'll just look him up on the old Twitter machine. He's at Ben J. Morse. Well, that was easy. He's even got a little check mark by his name. Isn't that cute? And, of course, I am at Russell_Sellers for anyone who might want to continue following me on this crazy journey. Didn't punch a hole in the Hoover Dam. Ben talked me out of that, of course. And I felt really good up until he said there was more to this. And I did a quick search as I got here in the car, and I've discovered that I'm going to have to make a trip back to the east. Back towards almost into Georgia. I'm going to have to go find the one person I know who's truly experienced this next crisis, supposedly this final crisis in all its glory. The other half of the Hard Traveling Fanboys, one Nick Duke. He should expect me. And since I kind of know how much he pulls in every year, I don't think he can afford the same kind of drones that one Mr. Morse had all around his house. Though I'm beginning to suspect that maybe it wasn't his decision to put them there. His wife did not seem very happy that I was in their backyard. But anyway, I didn't actually get to see the inside of the Morse household, but maybe next time. But for now, the journey continues as we continue managing our post-crisis lives. And I hope you guys will be here with me on the next episode when I hopefully get some real help. Until then.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
PlayStation Nation's Justin Rosero and Chad Kimball here. We want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlayStation.com, and we now offer them to you on 2 great feeds. On the PlayStation Wrestling feed, we bring you The Mothership, the Place to Be podcast, Main Event, Survey Says, Wrestling Warzone, a Monday Night Wars podcast retrospective, No Holds Barred, Jeff Learns Wrestling, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction shows. On top of that, we're also dipping into the vault, re-releasing the entire catalog of where the big boys play for your enjoyment. In addition to these full-length shows, we also deliver special network pod blasts on topics old and new.
The Place to Be Nation Pop feed is loaded with great content, offering such tremendous shows covering the land of pop culture, such as Geek and Sassy, Talkin' Pop, the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, Sunday Groove, PTB in Play, Freak Out Drive-In, Songs with Friends, Looking Forward, Looking Back, and Lucha Undead, as well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans with the Hard Traveling Fanboys, Sellers Points, Conversation Comics, DC Post-Crisis Management, Marvel Age, and Marvel Age Masterclass, plus weekly pod blasts that cover the gamut of comic topics. The feed is also filled with insightful sports content, including the NBA team, This Week in the NFL, and more.
And you can find all these current shows, plus archives of our past podcasts, including The Kevin Kelly Show, as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while there, be sure to rate and leave feedback as well. All of these shows, plus others available at PlayStation.com. We cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, in-depth stretch projects, and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlayStation.com/Amazon while doing your online shopping. And download our free PTB Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on our site. We also want to thank our friends at Boneheads Wing Bar, ProWrestlingOnly.com, and TheHistoryOfWrestling.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlayStation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.